Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. My name is Tim Spam. I'm the Chief Ranger for Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie National Historical Park. I'm very glad to be discussing a planning effort that we're in the beginning stages of. Thank you very much for joining us at this virtual public meeting. We look forward to sharing our planning effort with you and hearing your ideas. In this photo, this is a photo of Fort Sumter from the water. Also here with us online are other colleagues from the National Park Service, fellow employees of Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie, as well as NPS staff from our regional office and support office called the Denver Service Center. First, I'd like to introduce Brett Spalding.
Hello, everyone. Again, my name is Brett Spalding. I'm the Chief of Interpretation for the park sites.
And I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Bodo. I am a National Park Service project manager and planner working on this planning effort. And then last, let's have our other colleague, Elizabeth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Oliphant. I'm a visitor use management project specialist with the National Park Service supporting this planning effort. Good to see you all.
So welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. Today we have a presentation sharing initial ideas that the National Park Service is considering. And following the presentation, we'll hold a question and answer session. We think the presentation will be about 35 or 40 minutes. And that should leave us with plenty of time to hear any questions that you may have about the effort. Just a few announcements. If folks could mute themselves during the presentation, that would be appreciated. Please feel free to be on or off camera. And if you are calling in by phone, you can mute and unmute by pressing *6. We are recording this presentation so that if folks who missed the meeting, they will have a chance or an opportunity to watch this at a later date. And we anticipate that the recording will be available next week on the project website. And we'll also announce that by email and social media. I also wanted to add that Birnbaum Interpreting Service is providing real-time captioning. If you would like to use this captioning service, please click on the link that we'll provide in the meeting chat right now. And on this image, this slide, we have an image of within Fort Moultrie. All right, so let's get to our meeting purpose. Why are we here today? Why are we holding this meeting? And the answer is that the National Park Service is beginning a planning effort. We have identified issues that we want to address and some preliminary ideas for solutions. However, before we get too far, we want to seek your feedback on these initial ideas and also learn if you have other ideas for us. Last month, it is February now, so in January, we sent a newsletter detailing these ideas, and we'll cover those today in the presentation. But just for your information, you can find the newsletter and submit any comments you have on this planning effort on the website listed on the slide. That website has a comment feature that will allow you to provide feedback. And just to let you know, we are listening and we truly would like to receive your input. So one of my colleagues will now drop that link into the chat. Also, you can get to the project website from Google. If you Google Fort Sumter Visitor Use Management, the project website should appear near the top of the returned results. And once you're on that website, you'll navigate to the newsletter by clicking on Open for Comment. And in this image is an image of people walking down some stairs at Fort Sumter. All right, so this slide contains an outline of today's presentation. We'll start with an introduction to the project. After that, we'll summarize the issues that we are trying to address. And then we'll share the preliminary strategies that the National Park Service is considering. Towards the end of the presentation, we'll explain further how to share your feedback on the plan. And after the presentation, we'll have that informal Q&A session. We invite you to post questions in the chat or or raising your hand when we get to the Q&A session. And we hope that you'll focus your questions specifically on this planning effort. We'll answer those to the best of our ability, and we'll plan to adjourn today's meeting by 4:30 p.m. Eastern time at the latest. After that, if you still have unanswered questions, you can pose them as comments on the project webpage. And I'd just like to stress that tonight is a great opportunity to ask questions about the projects, but we won't be taking official comments tonight. So to comment, your best option is that project website that was on the previous slide. And in this image is an image of the Sullivan's Island Lighthouse. And with that, we'll pass it back to Tim to share an introduction.
You're on mute, Tim.
Thank you. Thank you, Sarah. So this photo is a photo of General Moultrie's grave at Fort Moultrie. Before we dive into issues, we'd like to start by highlighting the unique role that Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie National Historical Park serves as a part of the National Park Service system. National Park Service not only preserves a unique and important landscape, but also provides access to this landscape and its resources. That's core to our mission and core to our every decision that we make at Fort Sumter. The National Historical Park is significant to our nation's history and preserves a number of important resources. This photo is a photo of cannons at Fort Sumter. So we have 5 different park sites in the greater Charleston area. Down near the bottom center here is Fort Sumter, and that is out in the Charleston Harbor. Just to the right of that is Fort Moultrie, which is on Sullivan's Island. In the lower right corner here is the U.S. Coast Guard Historic Area. Over here is Liberty Square, which is in downtown Charleston, and that is where our Fort Sumter Visitor Center is, and it's one of the departure points for our ferry. Patriots Point over here is not owned by the Park Service, but it's a second departure point for our ferry. So the ferry that departs from Fort Sumter Visitor Center in Liberty Square comes through over here to Fort Sumter. The second ferry departs Patriots Point, comes this way to Fort Sumter. We have a 5th area up here. This is Charles Pinckney National Historic Site. That is not part of this plan. Fort Sumter is a 125-acre rectangular parcel in the middle of the harbor. 122.5 of those acres are the harbor itself in a rectangle around the fort. 2.5 acres are the fort itself, and this is the actual fortification right here. Fort Sumter was the start of our Civil War, and that's it's what gives it its greatest what it's known for. Liberty Square, as I said before, is in downtown Charleston, and this is the ferry departure, one of the ferry departures for Fort Sumter. It's also where our visitor center and museum is. Also on that property is the South Carolina Aquarium, which is owned by the city, but it is leased through the National Park Service. Fort Moultrie is on Sullivan's Island. This is the site of our park headquarters. We have a visitor center there. Fort Moultrie was the first victorious battle over the British in the Revolutionary War. And our jurisdictional boundary actually goes up to the beach here. We have a scenic easement in this other portion down here. The U.S. Coast Guard Historic District is also on Sullivan's Island. In this area, we've got the lifeguard life-saving station, historic Coast Guard life-saving station. Also on that site, we've got the Charleston Light or the Sullivan's Island Lighthouse. Our jurisdictional boundary in this area goes to just about here. All of this down from there is owned by Sullivan's Island, but we have a scenic easement over that area. This plan is needed to provide visitors with a high quality experience, protect natural and cultural resources, and provide future planning and management guidance to sites within the park. The plan is also needed to inform a new concession contract that provides access to Fort Sumter. The current contract expires in 2029. We have two images in this photo. This image to the left is the observation area from the parade grounds at Fort Sumter, and the image on the right is of the dock from Fort Sumter. All right, at this time, I'll turn it over to Sarah. I'm sorry, to Brett.
Brett. All right. Thanks, Tim. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So everybody, welcome. In this section, we'll review the key issues for each of the park sites. In the picture to the left, what you see is the United States flag flying at Fort Sumter, which we do on a daily basis. So the first section here, we're looking at Fort Moultrie Military Reservation. In this area, what we have are Battery Jasper. If you look at to the picture on the right, that's Battery Jasper. We have Cannon Row. We have Fort Moultrie itself, and we have the Park Visitor Center, which is pictured in the picture to the left there, and that's actually the back side of it. Inside the Visitor Center, we have a museum and a movie that is shown daily. The key issue for this area is that when people come here or learn about the area, they're just not aware of what is offered at the site. Here we have Fort Sumter, which is only accessible by a concessionaire operated ferry boat service that has two departure points, as Tim mentioned. The first departure point is the Liberty Square area where the Fort Sumter Visitor Center is. In that location, we actually have National Park Service staff. We have a museum, and there's also a bookstore located in that area. In the second departure area, there's nothing like that at that site. So no Park Service staff at that location. The key issue for this area here is that there is an inconsistent visitor experience that is very different between the two sites. And we also have a comfort and safety issue at Fort Sumter. During the summer, as you probably are aware, it gets very high temperatures and high humidity. And in this location, there's limited shade and water access. The picture to the left on the bottom is the Fort Sumter dock, which actually has one of the ferry boats docked up at it. And the picture on the right is taken from within the fort, looking out towards the officers' quarters, or what remains of them today. The third area that we have here is the U.S. Coast Guard Historic District, which is about a half mile down the road from the Fort Moultrie Military Reservation. In this area, we have a life-saving station garage. We also have a historic boathouse, which is pictured in the bottom picture. We also have the historic life-saving station, and that's in the top picture on the right. And then the other item that we have here is the Charleston Light, which is also known locally as the Sullivan's Island Lighthouse, which you can see to the left on the top picture there. The lighthouse is the only lighthouse in the National Park Service with an elevator, and it's possibly the only one in the United States that has an elevator. There is no public access to the lighthouse, and the elevator is inoperable at this time. I do want to point out that the lighthouse is a very popular site for visitors and for local residents, and it is still used as a navigational aid by shipping. In this area, there is minimal parking, and there is currently no visitor services. The key issue for this area is that currently there is no planning guidance at this time. The last thing that we want to discuss here is that climate change is a threat to the park resources. With sea level rise, there's an increased number of storms, and their intensity has also increased. Accessibility is also a challenge, especially when it comes to our forts. When looking at the proposed strategies and actions, this plan will prioritize how to best protect the resource, improve accessibility, and address climate change. In the pictures, on the one on the left, we have a photograph taken from the beach towards the Charleston Light, also known as the Sullivan's Lighthouse. And to the right there is a picture of an artillery round in the wall at Fort Sumter. And now I'm going to turn this over to Sarah.
All right, thank you, Brett. So now let's transition from the need for this planning effort and those issues that we are trying to address to turn to the preliminary strategies that the National Park Service is considering. These strategies were developed by the NPS team, and they are initial ideas. We really look forward to hearing your thoughts on them. And we do anticipate that they'll change as we continue through this planning process and before any decisions are finalized. The image in this photo is from the Fort Sumter gift shop, showing some shelves with merchandise. Okay, so I have 4 slides on the preliminary strategies, and the first 3 slides presents options A, B, or C for Fort Sumter. So on this first one, the park is considering options for enhancing visitor experience and has identified these 3 options for ferry departure points. I do want to note that, these options would not go into effect under the current concession contract, but we would be looking forward to future concession contracts. And we are interested in your thoughts to help us decide on a path forward. So option A is to offer 1 year-round ferry departure point at the Fort Sumter Visitor Center at Liberty Square. And this is where the Visitor Center and NPS staff are available. Option B is very similar today. It would be offering 2 ferry departure points. So one at Liberty Square, which is owned by the National Park Service. And then the second location we put here to be determined, because that would really depend on the concessionaire and where they would be able to pursue operations. Option C is to have 1 primary ferry departure point at Liberty Square and a second that would operate seasonally from another location. And again, we didn't specify the location because that would depend on any future concessionaire. And as far as the seasonal part of it goes, so for example, we might only run 1 departure point in the wintertime when visitation is lowest, but during other seasons have the 2 options available. All right. So continuing with those concepts A, B, and C, also want to talk a little bit about ideas for the ferry schedule. So under option A, like we said earlier, that is the option with 1 departure point at Liberty Square. But the idea here would be to increase the number of ferries or trips, which would allow visitors to better determine the amount of time that they want to stay on the fort, which is currently not provided. And this option would allow for frequency to vary by season, likely with more trips in the high seasons and fewer in winter. Option B, again, would be very similar to the current operations and would retain the frequency of ferries between departure points. And that's approximately every hour, so that's about the time that visitors can spend on the fort. Option C would offer a variety of trip lengths from the 2 locations during peak season, possibly allowing for a longer trip or experimenting with different lengths of time at the fort. Okay, so continuing on that note, the planning team also considered the gift shop at Fort Sumter and where it would be located, given the ideas for options A, B, and C. So for option A, since all visitors would be coming from Liberty Square, where a gift shop is available, the proposal is to remove the gift shop from Fort Sumter so that the efforts would not be duplicative. For option B, instead of a gift shop at Fort Sumter, the idea here, the thought here would be that a gift shop could be located at that second departure point to provide a more equivalent experience for visitors coming to the fort from either location. And for option C, since one location would be seasonal, the idea here would be to keep the gift shop at Fort Sumter, either at its current location or move it to the re-envisioned museum area, which we'll discuss in the next slide. All right, so this is my last slide on the strategies. There's a lot on here, but I do want to note that we didn't identify different options here. So we just kind of have one idea for these areas. I'll start with Fort Sumter, just continuing on that discussion. And like I mentioned earlier, there's an idea to re-envision the Fort Sumter Museum exhibit space. And if you've been there, there's a lot of information at the museum, and just many visitors can't get through the entire museum during their visit, even if they want to. And so the planning team has a lot of ideas about how to update the space for interpretation, also for shelter, if, during heat or other events. And one of the ideas is to have fewer artifacts on display, but really to rotate them on a more regular basis. This would help protect the artifacts, especially when there are storm events, for example. All right, I'll move on to the park-wide strategies. And there's a number here. So these would apply to all the sites. The first one is to address visitor safety and resource threats from sea level rise and increased storms. The second one is to create universally accessible interpretive opportunities. And we heard from Brett earlier that accessibility really is an issue throughout the park sites. The third one, and the last 3 under park-wide, really relate to, I think, developing a more cohesive experience at the Charleston area national park sites. So the first one being exploring a fee structure for all the sites, including Charles Pinckney National Historic Site, to kind of reduce confusion and maintain consistency with those locations. The second to last one here is improve connectivity between sites. And so that might mean just at each of the locations, making visitors aware of the other sites that are part of this group of national park sites. And then finally, evaluate options for transportation between the sites. All right, let's move on. So now we'll talk about the U.S. Coast Guard Historic District and some of those strategies that have been identified. And as you heard from Brett, there's really no guiding documents for how to enhance the visitor experience and visitor use of the site and interpretation of the site. So this planning document is looking at providing some of those high-level goals for what should this site be like for visitors. So the first strategy is to develop the site for visitation and rehabilitate the Charleston Light. The second one is work with the town to develop a multi-use trail that would provide access. Another one is to provide interpretive waysides. Then also The idea right now is to retain the maintenance operations that occur at this location, but also periodically provide interpretation of some of the preservation work that the National Park Service does at the forts. Another strategy would be create plans for installing exhibits, opening the lighthouse to the public, and working with the Coast Guard for ongoing maintenance. And finally, because this plan will be a little bit more high level, thinking about the goals for this site, additional site plan would most likely be needed to identify specific construction changes, for example. All right, and then finally, I'll move on to Fort Moultrie. So I think we shared a couple photos of the outside of the Fort Moultrie Visitor Center. So the first strategy is to complete facility planning for the Visitor Center, as that facility has some issues with its usability and functionality and efficiency, as well as accessibility for the entire site of Fort Moultrie, which there are a number of issues there. So those are the preliminary strategies, and we again look forward to hearing your other ideas, or if you like or dislike any of the ideas or have questions on those ideas when we get to the Q&A. But this brings us to the most important part of the meeting. The reason we're speaking with you now is your role in helping with this planning effort. And this image is an image of a model of Fort Sumter from the museum at Fort Sumter. So we really do want to hear from you now through February 15th. We invite you to review the newsletter, watch this video, or participate in this meeting and comment on the website. And just know that your comments will really help inform the National Park Service throughout this planning process and decision-making and priority setting for public investments over the next decade or so. I would encourage folks to use the website to make comments, but if that doesn't work for you, you can also provide comments by mail. And just to let you know, we're not going to take comments by email. So if you have access to the internet, please just use the website. We really appreciate it. And I'm just going to run through a few slides showing how to use the website because there are a few clicks that you have to do. This is the project homepage, and I know we've provided in the chat a link to this. Maybe we can do that again right now. When you get there, what you'll want to do is click on this open for comment on the left-hand side, which is circled in red. And then it'll take you to the documents open for comment page. At that point, click on this newsletter link. That is the document that you'll be commenting on. And that will take you to a page where you can click and say comment now and submit your comments. So when you do make your comments, please feel free to respond to anything that we presented tonight or that's in the newsletter. And we've also included some prompting questions that you can choose to respond to. So these questions are, number one, what issues most interfere with your ability to access and experience the park? Are there issues that have not been identified that the planning team should address in this planning effort? Are there things we didn't think of that you really see as issues? Number two, would a change in the number of ferry departure points impact your visit to Fort Sumter? As that is one of the ideas that we're putting out there. Number three, how would these ideas, so changes in year-round access, location of departure points, change in services offered, etc., influence your visit to Fort Sumter? And number four, are there other strategies that we didn't present that you would like us to consider that would really address the issues identified? All right, so I'm on our last slide before we get to the Q&A. So just a quick look at what comes next. So again, our public comment period runs now through February 15th. After that, the planning team will consider changes to the strategies based on your feedback. And then starting this summer and continuing on into 2025, we will be drafting the management plan. And you will have another opportunity to review that plan and make public comment at that time. We'll have another formal public comment period at that time. So that's about a year from now. And following that public comment period, we will finalize the plan. So This whole planning effort is expected to be completed in fall of 2025. I do want to note that most of the strategies in the plan would not be implemented immediately. As I mentioned earlier, some would depend on the concession contract timeline, and other actions would take place as funding and staffing and park priorities allow. This is really a long-range effort and a roadmap for the next 10 plus years. So there will be incremental change over time. All right. So that concludes our presentation, and now we'll transition to Q&A. Elizabeth will be our moderator. And I would like to invite you to ask questions in one of two ways. Feel free to type questions into the chat, or if you want to raise your hand using the raise hand feature, we'll call on you to unmute your mic and ask your question. And we might bounce back and forth between the chat and raise hands. And let's see, if you are calling on your phone, you can press *6 to unmute or mute and just jump in. We'll take a pause to see if anyone on the phone has any questions, and we'll read aloud your questions that are submitted in the chat. I just would like to encourage everyone to use considerate language and also be concise to allow us to hear from as many of you as we can, although I don't think there's that many folks at this meeting, so we probably have a significant time for everybody. And then I'll just remind you that this conversation is not, we're not taking formal comments at this meeting. So please, if you have comments, submit them at the website or mail them to us. But we are listening, and we're really hoping to understand your thoughts and concerns and to answer any questions. All right, with that, I don't see any questions in the chat, but I will hand it over to Elizabeth to get us started.
Thanks, Sarah, and thank you everyone for that great presentation. I guess I'm a little biased. I thought that was a great presentation. Please feel free, as Sarah said, to drop any questions that you have into the chat, or feel free to use the raise hand function, which is at the top of your screen. It looks like a little hand giving a high five. And feel free to come off of mute to share any questions that you would like on this exciting opportunity to plan for Fort Sumter and Fort Moultrie National Historical Park. Just going to let it be quiet for a moment if anyone wants to jump in. Well, if there aren't any questions, I'm just going to remind you again, we have the links to our website where you can provide your comments. You can, you'll be able to see the recording of this that will be posted early next week, as well as the newsletter. If you want to remind yourself of any of these topics, and we really do, I'll just stress again, we would love to hear from you, hear your thoughts and ideas and your feedback, and really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. Sarah, I'll turn it back to you.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. I'll add that we do have another public meeting today at 6 p.m. and that will be the exact same format as right now. So I will just say thank you. Thank you for everyone who presented, and we look forward to seeing your comments. And I guess with that, we can probably close the meeting.